They wrote her name between the china cabinet and the parlor curtains. Not as a person, as a line item. Entry 47 in a leather-bound ledger that Mr. Simeon Beaufort had spent 3 weeks preparing with the care of a man who had been waiting a very long time to put his name at the bottom of something valuable. One household maid, age approx. 22, included with domestic contents, no separate valuation. Below the curtains, above the fire irons, Willa Trescott read her own entry from the doorway of the study, standing with her mop handle pressed flat to her side so she took up less space, and she thought quite clearly, "So that is what I am worth to him. Less than the curtains. More than the fire irons. Not enough to list separately." She had been practicing invisibility for 2 years. She was very good at it by now. The estate had a name, Harwell Grange, her father's house, the house she had been born in, the house where she had learned to read at the desk in that very study, sitting on her father's knee while he traced letters in a ledger, much like this one. A different ledger, one with her name in it differently. When her father died, Willa had been 19. The lawyers had come, and Mr. Beaufort had come, her father's oldest business partner, the man her father had trusted above all others, and within a fortnight the house was his and she was gone. Not dead, not sent away, just quietly reclassified. Beaufort had been generous about it in his way. He had let her stay, as a maid. She had understood, in those first numb weeks, that there was no other option. She had no money. The lawyers Beaufort controlled had produced a trust document she had never seen before, one that directed the estate to him as executor, pending the resolution of debts her father had apparently owed. She had no solicitor of her own. She had no family closer than a distant cousin in Halifax who did not write. And so she had stayed, and she had learned to scrub floors without letting her hands shake. And she had been very, very careful never to look at the portrait of her father that still hung in the upstairs hall. She had also kept the ring. It was small, her father's signet, the Trescott seal, pressed into old gold, worn smooth on the inner band where he had turned it for 30 years. A loyal housemaid named Dorothy had pressed it into her hands the morning Beaufort's men came to take an inventory of her father's belongings. "Hide it," Dorothy had said. "Don't let them find it. It means something. That ring. More than I can explain right now, but more than he deserves to take." Dorothy had been dismissed that same afternoon. Willa had sewn the ring into the lining of her left boot, and she had worn it every day since, and she had never told a soul. It was the only thing she had left that was hers. She was careful with things that were hers. The buyers came on a gray Tuesday in November, the kind of morning that made the whole countryside look like something painted in charcoal and then thought better of. 3 carriages, a solicitor's clerk with a leather satchel, 2 men from the provincial land registry, and at the last, separate from the others, arriving 10 minutes after, as if time were a thing that happened to everyone else, a plain black coach drawn by horses so well matched they were almost theatrical in their perfection. Willa watched from the upper landing. She had learned to watch from upper landings. You saw more from above. People forgot to guard their faces when they thought no one important was looking. She recognized Beaufort's mood the moment the black coach stopped. He had been easy all morning. Too easy, laughing with the registry men, offering brandy before noon, the smile of a man who has already counted his winnings. When the black coach door opened, his ease did not disappear, it thinned. The man who stepped out was perhaps 35. Dark coat, no crest on the panel, no unnecessary ornamentation anywhere about him. He looked at the house the way a surveyor looks at a property line, not with admiration, not with hunger, but with a methodical attention that took everything in and gave nothing back. Then he looked at Beaufort's outstretched hand, shook it briefly, and walked inside. His name moved through the house in a whisper that reached even the upper landing. The Duke of Carwick. Willa had never heard of him. She would have remembered. They laid the ledger out in the study, as was proper when a buyer of consequence arrived. Beaufort stood at the window with his brandy and narrated the estate's virtues, the acreage, the timber rights, the quality of the tenant farms, in the warm, proprietary tone of a man who had owned something long enough to believe he had always owned it. The Duke of Carwick sat at the desk and read the ledger. Willa came in quietly with a tea service that no one had asked for, because a maid with a reason to be in a room was invisible, and she set it on the side table and did not leave. He read the way she used to watch her father read contracts, carefully, without expression, never skipping. He did not skim. He did not nod along to Beaufort's narration. He turned each page with the same deliberate attention, and when he reached a page that interested him, he turned back to confirm a detail, and then moved forward again. He reached page 4. He slowed. He read something on page 4, and then, without turning the page, he read it again. Willa watched his eyes go still. She was across the room, standing against the wainscoting with her hands folded, and she could not see which entry had stopped him. But she watched him read it once, and then she watched him read it a second time, and the room did not change in any visible way, yet she felt something shift in it. The way a room feels different when someone in it has just made a decision. He closed the ledger. He looked up. He did not look at Beaufort. He did not look at the solicitor's clerk. His eyes moved across the room with a quiet, unhurried precision, and came to rest on the maid standing against the far wall with a tea service she had not been asked to bring. He held her gaze for the space of 3 full seconds. Willa did not look away. Then he turned to his solicitor, a small, gray-haired man who had come in behind him and stood near the door. "Hargreaves," he said, "my record book." Beaufort's smile held. "If there's something in the inventory that requires clarification, Your Grace, I am entirely at your—" "Thank you." The Duke's voice was even, not warm, not cold. "Simply finished. I'll speak with you about it presently." The solicitor produced a slim leather book from his satchel. The Duke opened it to a blank page, uncapped a small ink bottle from the desk, and wrote something in a hand Willa could not read from across the room. He wrote 2 or 3 lines. Then he signed it, and he passed the book to his solicitor without a word, and the solicitor signed beneath it, and the date was already printed at the top of the page because the Duke of Carwick, Willa would later understand, was a man who dated every page in his record book the moment it was opened, a habit of a careful man, the habit that saved everything. He did not say what he had written. He capped the ink, closed the book, returned it to Hargreaves, and looked at Beaufort with an expression that was entirely pleasant and gave nothing away at all. "Now," he said, "tell me about the Eastern timber lease." That night, the cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Mrs. Dove, who had stayed on through the transition and all 2 years of what followed, and had never once asked Willa questions she could not answer, found her in the kitchen scraping the supper pots. "The Duke's man came to the back door this evening," Mrs. Dove said, in the tone she used when she was being careful with information. "The solicitor. Hargreaves." Willa kept scraping. "Anne. He wanted to know how long you'd been in this house. Not as a maid, how long altogether." She paused. He knew to ask it that way. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you came here as a child, with your father, and that your father died and the house changed hands, and that you stayed on in a different capacity." Mrs. Dove sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "He asked if you had family elsewhere. I said I didn't know of any. Then he said you were to be available in the morning, in the front hall, 9 o'clock. The Duke wants to speak with you himself." The scraping sound stopped. "With me," Willa said. With you, child, just you, no one else present." Willa set the pot down carefully. Her hands were steady. She had worked very hard for 2 years at keeping her hands steady. Did he say why? No. Mrs. Dove looked at her with the same careful attention the Duke had used from across the study. "Willa, is there something about this house, about your father's house, that you haven't told me?" There was a long pause. The fire settled. "There might be," Willa said. "I'm not certain yet what it means." "Then perhaps," Mrs. Dove said quietly, "this is the morning you find out." She barely slept. She lay in the narrow room off the kitchen and turned over the shape of things. The 2 years, the ring in her boot, the entry in the ledger she had read from the doorway, and the man who had read it twice and then written something she could not see into a book that his solicitor had signed. She had spent 2 years telling herself she was nobody. It was the only safe thing to be. A nobody was not worth pursuing, not worth harming, not worth examining too closely. A nobody with mops to carry and fires to lay was a person the law had no interest in, which meant the people who had remade her into a nobody had no reason to look at her again. And now a Duke had looked. He came at 9 o'clock exactly, alone, and closed the door of the front hall behind him, and the two of them stood in the room where Willa had sat on her father's knee and listened to him read aloud on winter mornings, and where she had not allowed herself to feel anything for 2 years, and she stood very straight and did not look at the floor. She saw now without the distraction of a crowded room, a man with tired eyes, not unkind eyes, not indifferent ones, simply tired, in the way of a person who has been looking for something for a very long time, without being certain they would recognize it when they found it. He stopped at a courteous distance. "You know who I am," he said. "You are the Duke of Carwick, Your Grace. And you know why I've asked to see you." "I don't, Your Grace." She paused, "though I suspect it has something to do with page 4 of the ledger." Something moved in his expression. Not surprise, more like the recognition of something expected. "Entry 47, he said. "Your entry." "Yes." "A person," he said, "cannot be listed in a bill of sale, not anywhere under the law as it stands. The man who wrote that entry either does not know that or does not particularly care." He looked at her steadily. "I want to know which one it is, and to know that, I need to understand how you came to be in this house, not as a maid, from the beginning." So she told him, not all of it, not yet, but enough. Her father's name, his death, the trust document she had never seen before, Beaufort's careful, smiling generosity, the reclassification, the 2 years. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the hall was very quiet. "Your father," he said, "William Trescott." She went still. "You knew the name." "I knew of him. He had dealings with my father's estate many years ago. A fair man by all accounts, a careful one." He paused. "When he died, I heard it noted in passing. There was a daughter, an only child." "Yes." "The record I was shown at the time," the Duke said, slowly, "indicated that the daughter had died as well, some months after her father. A fever, I believe it was noted." The words arrived in the room and sat there. Willa heard her own heartbeat. "I am not dead," she said, and her voice came out steadier than anything she had felt in 2 years. "No," the Duke said. He looked at her with the same expression she had seen when he read her entry the second time, the expression of a man confirming something he had not dared to believe. "You are not dead. But someone has taken considerable care to establish that you are." He reached into his coat. He drew out a folded sheet of paper, not the ledger entry, something different, something she recognized from across the room as a legal document, and he held it toward her. This was filed with the land registry 2 years ago, when the estate transferred to Beaufort's name. It records the death of one Willa Trescott, only daughter of William Trescott, from fever. thus closing the direct line of inheritance and clearing Beaufort's claim as executor with powers of full disposal. He held it a moment longer. It is witnessed. It is certified. By every external measure, entirely legitimate. She took the paper. She read it. She read it again, because the first time her eyes moved over it without quite believing the words. Her own death certificate, her name, her age. Her father's house listed as the address, a physician's signature she did not recognize, a date 14 months after her father had died, 14 months into the 2 years she had spent becoming nobody. "He wrote me out of existence," she said, and her voice did not shake, and she was glad of that, though she was not entirely sure how. "It appears so." He was watching her carefully. "Did your father leave you anything?" "A document, an object, anything that might establish your identity separately from the official record." Her hand went, without her quite deciding to, toward her left boot. "He left me a ring," she said. "His signet. It has the Trescott seal." She hesitated. "It's hidden. I've kept it hidden for 2 years. Can you bring it to me?" She bent and worked it free of the lining. 2 years of practice had made her quick, and she straightened and held it out on her open palm. The Duke of Carwick looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Something crossed his face that she could not quite name. It was gone before she could hold it still enough to read it. "That is the beginning of a proof," he said quietly. "Not sufficient alone, but the beginning." He looked toward the door. "Keep it somewhere other than this house tonight. Give it to no one. Tell no one you have it." But Willa was already understanding something. She had spent 2 years learning to read the shape of danger before it arrived. "He doesn't know I have it," she said. "Beaufort. If he'd known, he would have taken it already. Then for now, that is our advantage." His voice was even, but there was something beneath it. The tone of a man who has just confirmed the last piece of a calculation he has been running for some time. "I am going to purchase this estate as agreed. The paperwork will go to my solicitor tonight, and when it does, a notation I made yesterday in my record book, witnessed and dated, will become part of the transaction record." He paused. "What notation?" she asked. He almost smiled. It did not quite arrive, but the shape of it was there. "You'll know when it matters," he said. Then the door at the end of the hall opened, and Mr. Simeon Beaufort came in with his papers and his easy warmth and his smile that had never once in 2 years reached his eyes, and the morning changed entirely. She gave the ring to Mrs. Dove that evening, wrapped in a handkerchief, with a look that said, "Don't ask," and the cook tucked it somewhere in the kitchen without a word. It saved nothing. 3 days later, when Willa climbed the stairs to her room, she had been wrong about the hiding place, had meant to move the ring there, had let 1 day pass and then another. The lining of her mattress had been cut open and re-stitched with the kind of care that wanted not to be noticed, but was not quite invisible to a person who had sewn that seam herself. She sat on the floor and understood. Someone had been in this room, someone who had known exactly where to look. Not where the ring was, she had moved it, but where it might be, where a person hides the one thing they cannot afford to lose. From the window below came the sound of a cart on the service lane. One of Beaufort's men carried a small locked case out to it, unhurried, in the manner of ordinary business. She was certain of it before she could have said why. The Duke was in the study with his solicitor. She went downstairs and told him, standing in the doorway, that the ring was gone. He did not move to follow the cart. He stood at the window and watched the road settle, and his face was very still, and she wanted to demand that he do something, say something, that he not simply stand there while everything dissolved into whatever Beaufort was carrying away. "If I pursue that cart," the Duke said without turning, "I am appear accosting a gentleman on a public road with no lawful authority in this county." Whatever I take from him, he'll deny ever holding. The story becomes mine to disprove. He turned. His face was level. He wants me to go after it. He wants me angry and reckless and outside the law. He has the ring. He has a signet, the Duke said, which he will produce, if he produces it at all, as evidence of theft. A maid who stole from the house where she worked. He shook his head once. That story is already written. I think it has been written for some time, held in reserve. Then what do we do? The Duke looked at Hargreaves, who sat quietly in the corner with his satchel. We let them finish writing their story, he said, and then we show them ours is older. The countermove came within a fortnight, and it was, Willa would later think, a masterpiece of its kind. Beaufort's lawyers wrote first, a long, measured letter expressing deep concern that a servant girl, coached by a disgraced former associate who had since made himself scarce, was attempting to impersonate a deceased ward in order to lay claim to the estate. They enclosed Willa's death certificate. They enclosed the transfer document. They enclosed a sworn attestation from the physician who had certified her death, a Dr. Varley, whom Willa had never met, who practiced 3 counties away and had apparently certified a death he had never attended. Everything was dated. Everything predated anything the Duke might produce. Everything was sealed. Then, 4 days later, the writ arrived. A court order obtained through a magistrate's office where Beaufort's lawyers had been working for months, declaring one Willa Trescott, described as a vagrant and an impostor, to be taken into custody and transported to stand examination for fraud. 2 officers of the court arrived on a Wednesday morning, correct and unhurried, with the writ in a leather case and a closed carriage on the drive. The Duke of Carwick met them in the hall. He argued. Willa stood and watched him argue, and she watched him run out of arguments, because Beaufort had spent 2 years ensuring that every argument would run out. She is under my protection. She's named in the writ, Your Grace. The protection of a peer does not supersede a court order. The document is fraudulent. That may be, Your Grace. The court that issued the writ considers it certified. She has rights. Of course, Your Grace. She may exercise them before the court that issued the writ. The senior officer was not unkind. He was simply immovable. He had a legal order, and he had his duty, and he was sorry for the inconvenience. Willa looked at the Duke and saw, for the first time since that morning in the hall, that he had run out of moves. She saw him understand it. The tiredness in his face deepening for a moment to something worse than tiredness, to the particular grief of a man who has been careful and patient and right about everything and is still going to lose. She thought of Mrs. Dove, head up, answer straight, don't shrink. Your Grace, she said. Her voice was steady. She was very proud of that. Thank you for asking. No one had asked before who I was or whether I remembered. She meant it entirely. Whatever happens from here, someone asked, that is more than I had a fortnight ago. The officer's hand settled gently on her arm, and the Duke of Carwick lifted his head. The tiredness was gone. In its place was the expression she recognized from the day he had read page 4. The expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a very long calculation and found that it comes out exactly as he had expected. Wait, he said quietly, no urgency, no raised voice, just the word, and the room stopped around it. He walked to the writing desk. He did not hurry. He opened the drawer where Hargreaves had placed the solicitor's copy of the estate sale documents, and he removed the slim leather record book, and he turned to a page dated 2 weeks ago. The day he had arrived, the day he had read the ledger, the day he had asked Hargreaves for the record book and written 3 lines and passed it across the desk to be countersigned. Before you take her anywhere, the Duke said, I would have you note something for the court that sent you. He set the record book on the table and opened it to the dated page. The senior officer leaned over and read. His partner read. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The silence of men rearranging their understanding of where the ground was. "Read it aloud," the Duke said. "She has more right to hear it than anyone in this room, and she has not yet been permitted to." The officer cleared his throat. "Entry 47, he read. "The individual listed in the estate inventory as household domestic staff is not chattel and does not transfer with this estate or any other. She is taken from this date into the protection of the Duke of Carwick as a free subject. Her legal status and any question of inheritance or identity is to be determined by proper legal inquiry, not by any ledger or bill of sale. This notation is made of my own accord and conscience, before signature of the transfer instrument, as a condition inseparable from the purchase. Witnessed this day by J. Hargreaves, solicitor." He paused. "Signed, Carwick." No one in the hall spoke. "That notation," the Duke said, in the same even voice he had used to ask for the record book a fortnight ago, "is dated 2 weeks before your writ was drawn. 2 weeks before Beaufort's lawyers wrote their letter. 2 weeks before anyone in that distant court knew there was a dispute to adjudicate." He looked at the officers steadily. "Your writ names a chattel, an item of property to be transported and examined. But in the transaction record of this estate filed with Hargreaves' firm and copied to the county registry, there is no chattel. There has been no chattel since the morning I put my name in that book. I declined to purchase a person, because a person cannot be sold, and I said so in writing, before the ink on the transfer was dry." He picked up the book. "Your court issued an order against a piece of property. The property ceased to exist a fortnight before they wrote the order. The document saying so is older than their writ, filed in a house of record, witnessed by a solicitor of standing. You cannot execute an order for chattel that the law has already recognized on an earlier date as a free subject." He set the book down. "Go back to the court that sent you. Show them this page. Tell them the Duke of Carwick welcomes an open inquiry into the identity of this woman, into a death certificate filed by a physician who practiced 3 counties from where the death was supposed to have occurred, and into how a living person came to be listed between the china cabinet and the parlor curtains in a bill of sale." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice had risen just slightly, just enough to reach every corner of the hall. "Tell them I would welcome it very much, and then watch how quickly they discover they would rather not." The senior officer was a careful man. He looked at the record book for a long time. He looked at the writ. He looked at Willa. Then he closed his leather case. "I'll carry it back," he said. "I'm not in the habit of transporting a free person on the strength of an order that a prior filing says doesn't apply. That's above my station." At the door he paused and looked back at Willa, and something in his weathered face shifted. "For what it's worth, miss, I've served a good many orders. I know when one doesn't sit right. This one didn't sit right from the moment I read it." He went out. The carriage on the drive stood empty. Then it too turned away, and Willa stood in the hall, where her father had read to her on winter mornings, and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that the floor beneath her was solid. Beaufort's scheme came apart in open court, the way such things do once the first thread is pulled by someone with both the standing and the patience to pull it. The physician's signature on the death certificate matched, letter for letter, 2 other documents produced in similar circumstances for other convenient estates. A coincidence the court found remarkable. A clerk from the land registry remembered the transfer filing, and remembered too that the instructions for it had come from Beaufort's lawyers alone, without any direct instruction from the estate. Mrs. Dove testified. Hargreaves testified, and Beaufort himself, cornered and stripped of the practiced ease that had carried him for 2 years, said 3 different contradictory things about the trust document in the space of one afternoon, which the court noted with considerable interest. The ring was recovered from a locked case in Beaufort's coach house. It was the Trescott seal, as the family records in the provincial archive clearly showed, the same seal pressed into wax on 40 years of documents in her father's hand. It was enough, not alone, but together, the ring and the death certificate's irregularities and Hargreaves' filed notation and an entry in a ledger that a duke had read twice on a gray November morning. Together, it was enough. The estate that had never truly been Beaufort's was returned to the name it had always belonged to, and the courts recorded the transfer with the kind of thoroughness that suggests the clerks involved were quietly enjoying themselves. 2 years later, Willa walked through the front hall of Harwell Grange and stopped at the portrait she had not allowed herself to look at for so long. Her father looked back at her from the canvas the way she remembered. Calm, unhurried, the expression of a man who had taken more care in his dealings with people than most thought was strictly necessary. She thought he would have liked the Duke of Carwick. She thought he would probably have said something dry and precise about the manner in which the thing had been won, not by a dramatic intervention, not by a grand gesture, but by a man who had sat down at a writing desk on an ordinary morning and written 3 lines, because his conscience would not let him sign a document that treated a person as furniture. The notation still hung on the wall of the study, framed. She had wanted to put it away. The Duke had suggested gently that she might not. "It's the worst part of everything that happened," she had said. "It's the part that stopped it," he had answered. "Read the last line." She read it sometimes still, on mornings when she came down early, and the house was quiet, and the light lay flat across the study floor. The entry about the household maid, listed between the china cabinet and the parlor curtains, valued at nothing separately, and beneath it, in a different hand, a steadier one, the hand of a man who dated every page before he wrote on it. The individual listed above is not chattel and does not transfer with this estate. She is a free subject taken into my protection, her status to be determined by law, not by this ledger. She had asked him once, in the months after the court proceedings, and before anything between them had been decided, what had made him write it. Not the legal reasoning, the human part. "Entry 47, he said. He thought about it for a moment. "I have read a great many inventories. I had never seen a person in one before. And I thought, before I thought anything else, before I considered the implications or the strategy or any of it, I thought that I could not put my name on a page that placed a person between the curtains and the fire irons. That was all." He paused. "It was not a calculation. It was simply the only thing I could do and still look at myself in the morning." She married him in the autumn, in the small church near the East Field, where her father had taken her as a child to watch the harvest. Mrs. Dove came and cried, which she would have firmly denied if asked. On the morning of the wedding, the old cook helped her dress and fussed and pinned, and finally said, holding Willa's hands for a moment before she let them go, "I watched you for 2 years, child. You never did shrink, not once, not even when they came to take you. Head up, I always said it, and you always kept it up. I was proud of you then. I'm prouder now." Willa took the old woman's hands. "You told me to answer straight," she said. "It's the only reason he knew. If I'd looked at the floor like I was supposed to, if I'd made myself small enough, he'd have doubted. You gave me that. Before I knew what I was, you told me to stand like I was something." "You always were something," Mrs. Dove said. "They just wrote you down wrong." On the table in the entrance hall, the hall where Willa had stood straight-backed and unblinking, while a duke confirmed what she had always known and never been able to prove. The framed ledger page sat beside a small object she had placed there herself. The pen. Not Hargreaves's pen. The one the Duke had used that first morning at the writing desk, when he opened his record book to a dated page and wrote 3 lines before he knew the half of what she was, before he knew anything at all, except that a person had been written into a column beside the parlor curtains, and that this was not something he could sign his name beneath. She had taken it from his desk quietly, the way she had once hidden a signet ring in a boot lining, and he had let her keep it without asking why, because he understood that some things matter beyond their practical use. She picked it up now in the morning light and turned it once, and thought of a gray November morning and a man who had read page 4 of a ledger, and then read it again and had set it down and asked, in a voice too quiet to alarm anyone, for his record book. She set the pen down. From the kitchen came the sound of Mrs. Dove starting the morning, and from the east field came the first pale light crossing the grass, and Willa Trescott, her name, her house, her morning, went down to meet the day.